Welcome to a rather different location this week for Dan Really Likes Wine. I'm in Scotland at the Alfred Dunhill Links Championships, very kindly invited over by the team at Alfred Dunhill. And the reason that I'm having a look at some wine is because wine is very closely linked to this particular tournament. It's a tournament started by a guy called Johann Rupert. And if you know your wine, you know that Johann is just as passionate about that as he is about golf. And a lot of the wine that Johann produces on his various estates is represented here this week. Now, I had a look for some Scottish wine. I found plenty of Scottish beer, there was a great deal of Scottish cider, some very nice bespoke Scottish gin, and more single malts than you can count. But try to find Scottish wine and you're really going to battle. It is not something that the Scots do. So with no Scottish wine to be found, the next best thing to do was to find some South African wine that happened to be here. And over this week and next, we'll have a look at some of the wine that finds its way to this remarkable tournament. And remarkable it is. It brings in all manner of celebrities. This week, Tico Torres from Bon Jovi, Jamie Dornan, you'll know from the 50 Shades of Grey movies, Rory McIlroy and Ernie Els from a golfing perspective, Vladimir Klitschko, the boxer, Luis Figo is playing, he's the footballer, Brian McFadden from Westlife, Huey Lewis, Shane Warne. It's an incredible collection of people, and they all come in for a celebration on and off the course. On the course, they're looking to play their best possible golf at St Andrews, the home of golf, and it is St Andrews which this particular venue overlooks. We're at the Old Course Hotel on the 17th hole at St Andrews, but off the course there's plenty to cheer. Lots of old friends to meet up with, lots of cold Scottish days to do battle with, and if you're looking to see off the Scottish cold and you don't feel like a single malt, then what better way than to invoke some South African sunshine in the form of some great South African wine. And that's what I have got this week and next. And this week we start with 4 bottles from the Greater Rupert collection. And the first 2 of them come from the Cape of Good Hope range. We haven't seen this range for too long, it's only been out for a few years now, but it's already a range that's having a considerable impact. And in particular, this wine here, it's a Pinot Noir and it's from Elandskloof. I'm not sure there's a cooler or hipper part of the winemaking world, in particular the New World wine regions, than the Swartland at the moment. People like Andrea Molyneux, Ibn Sadi have made it the place to be and to make wine, and the results, what's coming out of the area, spectacular. So no surprises really that Johann Rupert, who's always known for his vision when it comes to anything he does, has had a look at some wine in that part of the world. And this is the Pinot Noir that he has put together out of Elandskloof. These are really high slopes. This is a good bit of altitude, so the kind of cooler regions you'd expect some quality Pinot Noir grapes to come from. This is only the 2nd vintage. The first lot they made about a barrel. I suspect that didn't last very long. They made a little more of this, and it's a wine that is really starting to suggest that the Swartland, amongst its many other claims to fame, could be the next great home of Pinot Noir. And all the hallmarks you'd expect of Pinot Noir. It's got the richness, it's got the softness, it's got the regality to it, and a really lovely glass of Pinot Noir. Maybe one that's going to find a natural home in Scotland. This could go with many different types of food, but I think this could sit rather nicely with haggis. So that's the first of the Cape of Good Hope range to try, a Pinot Noir that is the first of, I suspect, many vintages. Then on to the second. Now, these wines are all site-specific. They come from very particular places. That is Elandskloof, the Pinot Noir. This is a Syrah-led blend, and it comes from Rebecks-Rivier. It sounds slightly exotic. It's really a stretch of dirt road, but it's a stretch of dirt road that has some wonderful winemaking land along it. Not just Rupert land, there's Molyneux land there, there's Sadi land there. There's people who've realised that terroir-driven, this is a part of the world that's going to give you some outstanding wine. I haven't tasted it yet, but I have heard some very good things. Well, that's lovely. It's got a lightness to it, it's got some delightful fruit, really beautiful wine, good perfectly in South Africa. Might have a little bit more of a battle taking on the Scottish summer, which is where we find ourselves now. Scottish summer being colder, wetter and windier than a South African winter ever would be. But it's a lovely red wine, based firmly on the terroir and you'd have to say they've got this one very right indeed. From the Swartland, we head closer to the spiritual home of the Rupert family and La Motte. And as you might remember from past shows, this is an estate I have a bit of history with. La Motte was the very first wine estate I visited as a student, and a bottle of 1995 Millennium was the first bottle I bought. It meant I didn't get quite as many textbooks as I should have that particular semester when I was at UCT, but it was a very worthwhile investment. The Millennium is very well known, the Pernief is particularly well known as well, but this is a wine that I think is exceptional out of the La Motte stable. Anthonij Rupert, Johann's sister, and husband Hein Huchlenberg, who's a force majeure in the South African wine industry, have created a wine inspired by Anthonij. It's also, like the previous one, a Syrah-led wine, and this is the Anthonij R, and it's one that's very nicely aged indeed. It's a 2009 that I've stumbled across here in Scotland, rather lucky to find it. It's a wine I've tried before, but it's certainly not a vintage I've tried before, which is why I'm particularly excited. Oh, that's glorious. That's a lovely wine. The combination of the age, the structure, just everything that's gone into this wine. And there's quite a lot that's gone into this wine. There's some Shiraz here from Elim. They've got some Grenache that comes from Darling. There's some Cinsault in there from Malmesbury. There's some Carignan from the west coast, I think. I think there's some Merlot from Walker Bay in there as well. So there's a lot of thinking that's gone into this wine, and it's created a wine that is as strong and vivacious as the Rupert women celebrated by the name Anthonij Rupert, be it Johann's sister or indeed his daughter, who has exactly the same characteristics, good friend of mine, and I think that celebrates them both brilliantly. It's a delightful wine, and I think it's going to do extremely well in Scotland because it'll take on that cold weather. It'll also go really well with a country whose food has improved immeasurably. No longer simply the country of deep-fried Mars bars. They're making some excellent food, some terrific restaurants. The Road Hole Grill here at the Old Course Hotel is a superb example, and this bottle will be right at home with a top Scottish menu. And then to a pretty cool story in the history of South African wine. Now, South Africa and France don't always go well together. You only have to think of the last time a Frenchman refereed a Springbok rugby match to know that that's the case. But this is an example of France and South Africa going together magnificently. The late Dr. Anthonij Rupert, together with Baron Rothschild, put together a collaboration, France and South Africa, one of the great French wine houses, one of the great South African wine houses, and put together Rupert and Rothschild. And that's now passed on. Johann and his sister Anthonij oversee this together with Baron Benjamin de Rothschild, and they celebrate another one of the Rupert estates that's had a massive impact on the South African wine market, making some exquisite wine and making it with a combination of South African and French expertise. At the moment, I think it's La Motte, Rupert Wine, and the Rothschild who run this together. And this wine in particular celebrates Baron Edmund, who was the French side of the deal together with Dr. Anthonij Rupert, and it is, not surprisingly, a classic Bordeaux blend. You've probably had the Rupert and Rothschild Classique, which sells vast numbers of bottles every year. It's an extraordinary success story. There's the Baroness Nadine, the Chardonnay, the wife of Baron Edmund, but this is one I've always had a particularly soft spot for. It's a Bordeaux blend made by South Africans, and every time I've had it, it's just been superb, which gives me a great deal of motivation to see if this one follows suit. I often get friends who watch the show and say to me, Dan, you talk about the colour, but it all pretty much looks the same. Red wine looks the same, white wine doesn't look that different. There's just sometimes, though, you see a glass, and I'm not entirely sure what it is, but there's some glass and the colour just strikes you, and this is one of them. This is a perfect, deep cherry. It just looks like it's a great glass of red wine, and aesthetics are a big point. Psychology is a huge element of wine, and if it looks good, there's a far better chance you're going to enjoy it. And just looking at that colour and the richness of it, it's already off to a good start. And again, Another lovely South African bottle of wine. You can taste that it's considerably younger than the previous one. There's still just a little sharpness to it. It's wine that can settle down, and given the nature of this wine, settle down for many, many, many years to come. It's a Bordeaux blend with huge legs in it, but already you can see where it's going. You can see the richness, you can see the strength to it. It's got a big broad set of shoulders, and it's a very powerful wine. It's a Bordeaux blend as you'd come to expect, but just made delightfully. The Cab Franc there, the Merlot there, the Cabernet Sauvignon there. It's taking the hallmarks of Bordeaux's finest. It's giving them a beautifully South African spin, and it's turning them into something that not just Baron Edmund would be very proud of, but I'm sure Dr. Johann Rupert as well. And indeed South Africa, because it's shown that we can take what the French do and do it just as well at home. And indeed across the board, the Rupert wines, like so many of our great South African wines, showing the rest of the world that it doesn't matter where you are, whether you're back home or you are here this week in Scotland, South African wine has a flag that can be flown very high and very proudly, because the quality of wine we're making really is exceptional. Enjoy that, Scotland, and cheers.